I was holding a piece of paper that was technically harvest wheat in color. But in my soul, it was the color of despair. It was 10:00 a.m. on a Saturday. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I was standing in my driveway reading a death sentence for my son's happiness. Behind me, the rhythmic clack-roll-clack of skateboard wheels on plywood echoed. My 12-year-old, Leo, was practicing his drop-ins on the quarter pipe we had built together 3 weeks ago. It wasn't much, just a 4-foot-high wooden structure tucked into the corner of our driveway, obscured, mostly, by the hydrangeas. "Dad, did you see that?" Leo yelled. "I almost nailed the coping." I forced a smile, crumpling the heavy cardstock in my hand. "Yeah, bud. Looked smooth." I looked back at the letter. It was from the Glenwood Meadows Homeowners Association. The logo was an embossed oak tree, which was ironic because they had made me cut down my actual oak tree last year because it was dropping non-compliant debris. I read the opening paragraph out loud to the empty street. "Dear resident, it has come to the attention of the Architectural Control Committee, ACC, that an unauthorized recreational structure has been erected on Lot 402. "Unauthorized recreational structure," I muttered. "It's a pile of 2x4s and plywood, Patricia. It's not a missile silo." I knew it was Patricia. It was always Patricia. She was the HOA president, a woman who wielded her clipboard like Excalibur and treated the neighborhood covenants like the Geneva Convention. She lived 2 houses down. I could feel her watching me right now from behind her custom-ordered taupe-colored blinds. The letter continued. "Per Article 6, Section 9 of the Glenwood Meadows Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, CCNRs. No temporary structures, ramps, sheds, or unapproved aesthetic alterations may be visible from the street or neighboring properties. You have 48 hours to remove the unsightly wooden apparatus or face a fine of $100 per day." Unsightly. That was the word that stuck. We had sanded that wood. We had stained it a tasteful cedar tone to match the fence. I walked over to the ramp. Leo was sitting on the top deck, his helmet slightly askew. He looked at the paper in my hand, then at my face. The excitement drained out of him like water from a cracked tub. "Is it Patricia?" he asked. Even the kids knew the villain of this story. "Yeah, Leo. It's Patricia. Do we have to take it down?" I looked at the ramp. I remembered the weekend we built it. I'm an accountant by trade. I spend my life in spreadsheets, so using a circular saw made me feel like a pioneer. We had bonded over stripped screws and splinters. "Let me talk to her," I said, lying to myself. "Maybe she'll be reasonable." The confrontation. She was not reasonable. I walked over to her house an hour later. Her lawn was manicured to within a millimeter of its life. I rang the bell. It played a melodic chime. That sounded smug. Patricia opened the door. She was wearing a floral blouse and that smile, the one that doesn't reach the eyes, only the gums. "Dave," she chirped. "Did you get the mail?" "I did, Patricia. That's why I'm here. Look, about the ramp." "The apparatus," she corrected, stepping onto her porch and closing the door behind her so I wouldn't see into her sanctum. "Dave, it's an eyesore. We have property values to think about. If we let you keep that wooden thing, next thing you know, the Millers will want a trampoline, and the Johnsons will park their RV in the driveway. It's a slippery slope." "It's a piece of wood, Patricia. Leo loves it. He's out there exercising. Would you rather he be inside playing video games all day?" She sighed, a long, suffering sound. "I don't make the rules, Dave. I just enforce them. The bylaws are clear. No temporary structures. It looks cheap. It looks like a construction site. You have until Monday." It's in the back corner of the driveway. You have to stand on your tiptoes to even see it. She smoothed her blouse. Well, I happen to be very observant. Monday, Dave. Or I have to issue the fine. And you know the board is trying to raise funds for the new entrance signage. I walked back to my house, the rage simmering in my gut. I wasn't angry about the rule. I was angry about the smugness, the absolute delight she took in crushing a kid's hobby because it didn't match her beige worldview. The teardown Sunday was a funeral. Leo and I went out with drills and crowbars. We dismantled the ramp piece by piece. The screech of screws coming out of wood sounded like the ramp was screaming. Leo didn't cry, which made it worse. He just quietly stacked the wood. "It's okay, Dad," he said, trying to comfort me. "I can just skate at the park. The park is 20 minutes away, and it's covered in graffiti and broken glass, Leo." "It's fine." We finished by sunset. The driveway was empty. The unsightly apparatus was gone. I looked up the street. Patricia was watering her petunias, which was code for verifying compliance. She gave me a little wave. I didn't wave back. I walked inside, grabbed a beer, and marched into my home office. "Honey?" My wife, Sarah, called from the living room. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "I'm just going to do some reading." "Reading what?" "The enemy's playbook." I opened my laptop and downloaded the PDF I had ignored for 5 years. The Glenwood Meadows Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, 2018 amended version. I read through the night. I read about fence heights. I read about trash can placement. I read about the allowable shades of exterior paint, Sherwin-Williams agreeable gray, or accessible beige only. And then, around 2:00 a.m., my eyes blurry and my beer warm, I found it. Article 14, subsection B, Landscaping and Hardscaping. Permanent in-ground recreational landscaping features, including but not limited to koi ponds, sunken patios, and decorative retaining walls, do not require board approval provided they do not exceed the height of the perimeter fencing and utilize professional-grade masonry or concrete materials. I reread it. Then I read it again. Patricia had banned a temporary wooden structure. She had called it cheap. She had cited the lack of permanence. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, wicked grin spreading across my face. "Okay, Patricia," I whispered to the screen. "You want permanent? You want professional? You want aesthetic?" I wasn't going to build a ramp. I was going to pour a bowl, a concrete, kidney-shaped, terrifyingly permanent swimming pool for skateboards. And because it was technically a sunken patio with retaining walls, she couldn't do a damn thing about it. I picked up my phone. I needed a contractor, but not just any contractor. I needed someone who understood spite. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I took a mental health day, which was accurate because if I didn't execute this plan, I was going to lose my mind. I needed a contractor who could handle concrete, curves, and chaos. I spent 3 hours on Yelp and Angie's List, but everyone seemed too corporate. Dream Patios, LLC. Suburban Escapes. They were too soft. Then I found a website that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2004. The background was flames. The company name was Solid Ground Concrete. We pour it hard. I called the number. "Yeah, this is Carl," a voice rasped. It sounded like he gargled gravel for breakfast. "Hi, Carl. My name is Dave. I have a weird job. I need to pour a concrete structure in my backyard. It needs to have transitions, coping, and a 6-foot deep end. But on the permit, we need to call it a sunken patio." There was a long silence on the other end. "You building a skate bowl, buddy?" Yes, I am." "And you trying to screw over an HOA?" I paused. How did you know? Because I hate HOAs, Carl said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Enter concrete. Carl arrived in a Ford F-350 that was more rust than paint. He stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, wearing a neon yellow shirt with the sleeves cut off, revealing tattoos of rebar and skulls. He had a cigarillo unlit in the corner of his mouth. Patricia was, of course, watching from her window. I saw the blinds twitch. Carl saw it too. He stared directly at her window and scratched his belly. The blinds snapped shut. Nice neighborhood, Carl grunted, walking into my backyard. Smells like oppression. This is the spot, I said, gesturing to the flat expanse of grass where my son used to play catch. I want a kidney bowl, shallow end 3 feet, deep end 6 feet. Waterfall transition, pool coping, the works. Carl walked the perimeter, his boots crunching on the grass. He pulled a tape measure from his belt with the speed of a gunslinger. We can do it, he said. We'll need to dig deep. Drainage will be key. We tie it into the city storm drain easement at the back property line so the inspector doesn't pitch a fit. Speaking of inspectors, I said, handing him the printout of Bylaw 14B. We need to be careful with the wording. Carl read the bylaw, squinting. He chuckled, a dry, dusty sound. Permanent in-ground recreational landscaping feature. I love it. See, the beauty of concrete is that once it's poured, it's there. To take it out, they'd need a jackhammer crew and about 10 grand. They ain't gonna touch it. Can we start soon? I got a gap in my schedule because a client in Oakwood stiffed me on a deposit. I can have the excavator here tomorrow. Do it. The permit game. The next step was the city. The HOA didn't have jurisdiction over building permits, only aesthetic guidelines. If the city said it was safe, and the HOA rules said hardscaping is allowed, I was in the clear. I went down to City Hall. The clerk, a woman named Brenda, who looked like she wanted to be literally anywhere else, stamped my application for a retaining wall patio modification without even looking up from her Sudoku. Just make sure you call 811 before you dig, she mumbled. You got it, Brenda. I walked out of City Hall with a stamped permit. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like a shield. The calm before the noise. That night at dinner, I broke the news to Sarah and Leo. Leo, I said, piling mashed potatoes onto his plate. I have good news and bad news. He looked up, wary. What's the bad news? The bad news is, we aren't putting the wooden ramp back up. He slumped. Okay. The good news, I continued, fighting back a grin, is that a man named Carl is coming tomorrow with a tank-sized shovel to turn the backyard into the X Games. Leo dropped his fork. No way. Way. But you have to promise me one thing. When Mrs. Patricia asks what we are doing, what do you say? Leo thought for a second. We're building a patio? Exactly. A sunken, curved, recreational patio. Sarah sipped her wine, looking at me with a mix of concern and arousal. You're going to war, aren't you, Dave? I didn't start it, honey, but I'm going to finish it. And I'm going to finish it in 4,000 psi reinforced concrete. I slept like a baby that night. The silence of the suburbs was heavy, but I knew it was about to be shattered. At 7:01 a.m., 1 minute after the municipal noise ordinance allowed construction to begin, the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a flatbed truck delivering a mid-sized excavator. The driver backed it down the street, the beep, beep, beep of the reverse alarm echoing off the colonial-style facades of Glenwood Meadows. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the spectacle. Patricia was out of her house in 12 seconds. She was wearing a silk robe and fuzzy slippers, her hair in curlers. She ran down her driveway, waving her arms. "Stop! Stop right there!" she shrieked at the truck. "Driver." The driver, a guy Carl called Tiny, who was 6'5", leaned out of the cab. "Morning, ma'am. Just delivering the equipment." "You can't park that here. This is a residential street. What is going on?" She turned her death glare onto me. "Dave, what is this monstrosity?" I walked down the driveway, casual as could be. "Morning, Patricia. Just doing some landscaping. You know, improving the property value." "Landscaping? You need a bulldozer for petunias?" "It's a hardscaping project. Bylaw 14.1b. I'm putting in a sunken patio. Very chic. Very permanent." "You didn't submit an ARC form. You need board approval." I pulled the folded copy of the bylaws from my robe pocket. I had highlighted the relevant section in neon orange. Actually, per section 14.b, in-ground features do not require approval. And here, I whipped out the city permit. "Is the city authorization for excavation?" She stared at the papers. Her mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. She looked for a flaw, a loophole, anything. This is ridiculous. The noise, the dust." "We'll keep the dust down with water, ma'am," Tiny yelled from the truck. "Now, if you could move, I got a schedule." She stepped back, defeated for the moment. But I knew this was just the opening skirmish. The hole. For the next 3 days, my backyard was a war zone. The excavator tore into the earth. It wasn't just a hole. It was a crater. We were moving tons of dirt. Carl was a maestro. He operated the excavator with surgical precision, carving out the curves of the bowl. He shaped the hips, the waterfall drop, the deep end. It looked like he was sculpting clay, but the clay was my lawn. The pile of dirt in the front yard grew higher. We had dump trucks cycling in and out to haul it away. The street was coated in a fine layer of brown dust. Bliss visit number 1. On Tuesday afternoon, I was working from home, aka watching Carl work from my kitchen window, when I saw the flashing blue lights. A police cruiser pulled up. Officer Miller stepped out. He looked tired. He adjusted his belt and walked up the driveway. Patricia was standing on her porch, pointing accusingly at my house. I met him at the door. "Afternoon, officer." "Afternoon," Miller said. "We got a complaint about suspicious excavation and potential structural damage to the neighborhood?" "I'm building a patio, officer. Would you like to see the permit?" Miller sighed. "Please." I showed him the permit. I showed him the engineering plans stamped by the city. "It looks like everything is in order," Miller said, glancing at the massive hole in the back. "That's a hell of a hole, though. What kind of patio is this?" "A very fluid one," I said. Miller looked at me, then at the excavator, then at the skateboard sitting by the back door. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Right. A patio. Look, just keep the street clear of mud, okay? The lady down the street, Patricia? Yeah, her. She's called dispatch 3 times. Said you were building a bunker. Said you were digging for oil. Just keep it clean, keep it legal, and get her off my back." "Will do, officer." Miller walked back to his car. I saw him stop at Patricia's house. I couldn't hear what he said, but based on her frantic hand gestures and his stoic shrug, she wasn't getting the SWAT team she wanted. The rebar web. By Thursday, the hole was prepped. Now came the steel. Carl and his crew spent 2 days tying rebar. It looked like a metallic spider web covering the curves of the earth. It was industrial. It was aggressive. Patricia walked by with her dog, a nervous poodle named Fifi. She stopped at the edge of the property line, peering through the gaps in the fence. "That's a lot of steel for a patio, Dave," she called out. "Structural integrity is important, Patricia," I yelled back. "Don't want the ground to shift." "It looks like a prison yard," she sniffed. "Industrial chic is very in right now." She huffed and walked away. I turned to Carl, who was tying wire. "She's gonna flip when she sees the concrete trucks," Carl said. "How many?" I asked. 5 mixers, back to back. We have to pour it all at once or we get cold joints. Once we start, we can't stop for anything. Not for God, and definitely not for the HOA. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Friday morning felt like D-Day. I was up at 5 a.m. making coffee for the crew. Carl arrived with 4 guys who looked like they ate nails for snacks. They were the finishers. The guys who would smooth the concrete into glass. At 7:45 a.m., the ground rumbled again. But this was different. This was the heavy, grinding roar of loaded mixers. The first truck turned onto the street. Then the second. Then the third. It was a convoy. A parade of gray drums spinning. They lined up down the block, idling. The smell of diesel filled the air. Patricia came out. She didn't just stand on her porch this time. She marched into the middle of the street. She stood in front of the lead truck, her arms crossed. "You cannot block the street," she screamed. "This is a fire hazard. I'm calling the fire marshal." The driver, a guy with a beard that reached his chest, leaned out. "Lady, move! The mix is hot. I got 90 minutes before this load sets up in the drum." "I am the president of the HOA, and I demand you cease this. Honk!" The air horn on a cement mixer is loud. It is designed to be heard over construction sites. On a quiet suburban street, it sounded like the apocalypse. Patricia jumped 3 feet in the air. I ran out. "Patricia, get out of the way! These guys are on the clock!" "This is illegal!" she screamed, clutching her chest. "It's permitted. Now move, or you're obstructing traffic, which actually is illegal." She scrambled onto the sidewalk, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the inspector. I know people at the city." The pour. The first truck backed into the driveway. The chute swung out. The gray sludge began to flow. For the next 4 hours, it was controlled chaos. The crew was in the hole, wading in wet concrete. They were pulling it up the walls, shaping the transitions. It was backbreaking work. Carl was barking orders. "More slump! Get it up the vert! Watch the coping!" I watched in awe. It was an art form. They were sculpting a solid wave. As the third truck was emptying, a white sedan with the city seal pulled up. Patricia, who had been pacing on her lawn, ran to the car. A man stepped out. He wore a high-vis vest and a hard hat. It was the building inspector. "Oh no," I muttered. Patricia was pointing at the trucks, at the mud, at my house. The inspector nodded seriously and walked up the driveway. I met him halfway. "Permit?" he asked. He was all business. I handed it to him. "Right here. Retaining wall and patio." He walked past me to the backyard. He looked at the crew. He looked at the rebar. He looked at the shape of the bowl. Patricia was right behind him. "See? Look at it. That's not a patio. It's a hazard. It's a skate park. He lied on the application." The inspector looked at the deep end. He looked at the steel coping that Carl had perfectly set on the edge. He turned to me. "You poured this with 4,000 mix?" "Yes, sir. Fiber reinforced." "And the drainage?" "Tied into the storm easement. 4-inch PVC." The inspector looked at Patricia. "Ma'am, technically a patio is any paved outdoor area adjoining a house. The code doesn't specify it has to be flat." But it's curved," Patricia sputtered. The inspector looked back at the bowl. A strange look crossed his face. He tapped his clipboard. "You know," the inspector said, his voice dropping to a whisper so only I could hear, "I used to skate the Del Mar skate ranch back in '88. My eyes went wide. He winked. "Transition looks good. Tight radius in the shallow end. Make sure you seal it properly." He turned back to Patricia. "Everything appears to be up to code, ma'am. The permit is valid. Recreational hardscaping is a broad term." Patricia looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "This is corruption. I'll bring this up at the next board meeting." "You do that," the inspector said. "Good luck with the pour, Dave." The finish. The inspector left. Patricia retreated to her house to presumably write a manifesto. The trucks left. Now came the noise. To get concrete smooth enough for skating, you have to burn it. You use power trowels, machines that look like fans sitting on the ground. Whir, chug, chug, whir. The sound was deafening. It went on for hours. It was the sound of perfection. By 6:00 p.m., the crew was done. The concrete was a dark, glistening gray. It was perfect. Not a ripple. Not a crack. Carl wiped sweat and concrete dust from his forehead. He handed me the invoice. "Best patio I ever built, Dave." "Thanks, Carl. You're an artist." "Yeah, well, don't tell anyone. I got a reputation to maintain." He spat his cigarillo onto the ground, climbed into his truck, and drove off. I stood there looking at it. It was magnificent. It was a middle finger made of stone. We had to wait 28 days for the concrete to fully cure. It was the longest month of Leo's life. Every day we went out and watered it to prevent cracking. Patricia watched us. She had installed a privacy hedge along the fence line. I measured it one night. It was 6 feet 2 inches tall. The limit was 6 feet. I filed that information away for later. The rumors in the neighborhood were wild. Some thought I put in a koi pond. Others thought it was a bunker. I told Mrs. Higgins next door that it was a Zen garden for aggressive meditation. Finally, the day came. The concrete was white and hard as rock. I went to the garden center. I bought 2 large potted ferns. I placed them on the deck of the bowl, one near the deep end, one near the shallow. "There," I said to Leo. "Now it's a landscaping feature." Leo was vibrating with energy. "Can I skate it?" "Go for it." He dropped in. Clack. The sound was distinct. The hard urethane wheels on the smooth concrete sang. He carved the corner, grinding the pool coping with a metallic shh. He flew out of the deep end, caught air, and landed back in. "It's so fast!" he yelled. "Dad, it's perfect!" Within 20 minutes, 2 of his friends showed up. Then a third. They were taking turns, cheering each other on. The backyard was filled with the sounds of joy and physical activity. The final confrontation. I was grilling burgers on the actual patio, watching the kids, when the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. I opened the door. Patricia was there, flanked by the vice president of the HOA, a man named Greg, who always wore polo shirts tucked into khaki shorts. "Dave," Patricia said, her voice trembling with rage. "We can hear it. The noise, the grinding. It is a nuisance." "It's just kids playing, Patricia. It's 2:00 p.m. on a Saturday." "It is a skate park," she yelled. You built a commercial skate park in a residential zone. It's a private recreational facility, I said. And it's compliant. We are fining you, Greg piped up, trying to sound authoritative. Non-compliance with aesthetic harmony. We demand you remove it. I stepped out onto the porch and looked them both in the eye. Okay, I said. Let's play this out. You fine me. I appeal. We go to court. I show the judge bylaw 14B, which allows permanent recreational hardscaping. I show the city permits. I win. We will fight you, Patricia hissed. And let's say you win, I continued, leaning in. Let's say a judge orders me to remove it. Do you know what that entails? It's reinforced concrete, sinew, Patricia. 4,000 psi. To get it out, I will have to hire a jackhammer crew. They will be here for 3 weeks. It will sound like a machine gun firing from 8 o'clock a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. every single day. There will be dust. There will be trucks. And I will make sure they take the longest, loudest route possible. Patricia went pale. The memory of the power trowels was still fresh in her mind. Or, I said, softening my tone, you can go home. You can enjoy your privacy hedge, which, by the way, is 2 inches over the legal height limit, but I haven't reported it yet, and you can let the kids be kids. Greg looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at me. She looked at the hedge. 2 inches? She whispered. I measured it. She tightened her jaw. She looked at Greg. Come on, Greg. We have other matters to attend to. They turned and walked away. I went back to the backyard. Leo was doing a hand plant on the deep end coping. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the bowl. The neighborhood kids thought I was a legend. The other dads started coming over on weekends, drinking beers and watching the session, wishing they had the guts to pour 40 tons of concrete in their yards. I sipped my beer and watched my son fly. The HOA had banned a wooden ramp. They wanted conformity. They wanted silence. Instead, they got a monument. A permanent, loud, beautiful monument to malicious compliance. And honestly, it really did improve the property value.